Hi, and welcome to another episode of the eCom at One podcast. And today's guest is Will Christensen, the CEO of DataAutomation. How you doing, Will?
Doing really well. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. Great to have you on. Now, I think this is actually a first on the podcast, talking about automation, something I'm a massive fan of, a massive believer in. So I think let's start at the basics and then we'll get into it. So what is data automation?
So my favorite thing about data automation is going to a trade show when that was a thing. Like there was a time one day, a long time ago, when we went to these things called trade shows, and we've all forgotten what those are. For those of you listening, and it's been 10 years, we're in the middle of COVID or on the post end of COVID, and those seem to be a thing of the past. Maybe they're coming back now. But I'd go to this trade show and somebody'd walk up and say, "So, I see on your shirt it says data automation. What do you guys do?" And I just smile, and we automate data.
Yeah.
And that's really what we do. We've focused down on e-commerce now. So we do help other people in other industries, but we found that e-commerce is a space ripe for help in the world of automation. And so that's what we do. We automate manual processes inside e-commerce businesses.
So I'm always intrigued how my guests get into their field and how that started. So is there what led you into automation? How did it all start?
Well, I have always been someone who, and it's funny because it's taken me a while to come up with this term, but it's extreme laziness. I tend to be the type of individual who I'm like, okay, how can I make it so that this process is more efficient? Because, and it's funny because there's like this idea that I need to save time. I need to save time. I need to figure out how to do more and kind of lean into that. And that's relaxed a little bit over the years. I've realized that there's enough time in the world to do what we want to do with our lives. But that drive to make things more efficient caused me to start to look at everything I was doing. And I worked at an agency. This is several years ago. And I was the low man on the totem pole. And my job was to do 16 hours of copying and pasting to create reports for our clients. And so every week, 16 hours, and I was like in the middle of this, ready to like literally pull my hair out.
Yeah.
And I thought there's got to be a better way than this. I remember sitting down with my supervisor at the time, and he was like, "This is a VLOOKUP." He showed me in Excel, like, "Here's how you connect this spreadsheet to that spreadsheet." And I was like, okay, if there's something out there that can do that, what else is possible? And that began my journey. So really this all started with VLOOKUPs in Excel.
Yeah.
And very quickly I started to dive into coding and automating the back end with macros and like watching how all the world worked in terms of connecting things. And I spent somewhere around 300 hours that first year just teaching myself how to code, how to automate. And I automated that 16-hour process down to like a 4 or 5 hour thing where my computer actually woke up in the morning, did an hour or two's worth of work before I got into the office. And then I had 2 to 3 hours of like spot checking the automation and making it all work. So that's how I got started.
Love it. Love it. It's always nice to find I can very much relate to the 16 hours of doing X, Y, Z. I think we've all been there. I think a lot of listeners will relate to that. I think that's why it's so fascinating. Gone are the times where we really need to spend too much time on repetition if we're realistic. It's just I think people can get a bit attached to routine, but if they step back and go, hang on a minute, actually I'm spending 4 hours doing that, 3 hours doing that, there is something out there, or there could be something out there that could be built to save that time. I think it's a whole new world when you sort of dip your toe and start to really go into it. And so why should an e-commerce company use automation to scale specifically?
So e-commerce is one of those things that's very interesting because it's all about volume, right? There are some e-commerce businesses where they sell a high ticket item and they have an extreme margin, but those are more rare. It's more common to find a business where they have a razor thin margin on top. And the whole idea is sell a crap ton of X, Y, and Z. Like, let's get this widget to move. And I think that's fascinating, right? It's kind of the SaaS world where you create this widget and you sell that 1,000 times, and that's how you make money. It's the same idea with e-commerce where you got this widget and let's sell that widget 1,000 times, and that's how we make money.
Yeah.
And because there's that repetition, this thing's going to happen 1,000 times in that month. If you can take something that takes 2 minutes and turn it down to 30 seconds, that's not that impressive until you have to do it 1,000 times. So e-commerce in a way is the perfect catalyst for needing automation. And it's funny because when we opened our doors, when data automation began, e-commerce was not our focus. We were like, oh, cool, we're gonna go get involved in a lot of different places. And one of our founders, Brandon Checketts, is the founder of Feedback Genius, Seller Labs, the company that does a lot of Amazon automation. And so naturally, we got a lot of introductions to the e-commerce world. We were one of the first development partners at Skubana, and we became a development partner at Zapier. So we naturally sort of went the direction of having a lot of e-commerce roots, and it just became a natural place for us to thrive.
Yeah, I like it. I think, ultimately, to, I think to be quite crude, you are if you're in e-commerce, you're in the business of shipping a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of repetition there, whether it's trying to, going from your 100 orders a day to your 1,000 orders a day to your 10,000 orders a day, or whatever your number is listening in. But ultimately, with each of those orders, let alone all the background stuff, if you're doing 10,000 orders a day, there's 10,000 of this happening, 10,000 of that happening, 10,000 of whether it's pick, pack, warehouse, whatever we were talking about, replenish, whatever it may be, reorder, whatever it may be. I know when in our agencies, we wouldn't be where we are, or we'd be a fraction of the size of as we are now without that automation element. When you're dealing with, we've got clients with 100,000 SKUs. Well, without automation, a lot of those SKUs are going to get no action, if you like, when it comes to bid adjustments and SEO and so forth, where we can automate quite a few things. So for the e-commerce stores listening in, then they're thinking, okay, it sounds great, but where could we start? Where's sort of an appropriate start point for automation for an e-commerce store if maybe they're not doing much, or they're not aware of anything they're doing? There's maybe some things built into some of the systems they're using, but what would be a good when would be a good place to start?
So what I tell people is, and this is actually a question that I've come up with many, many times before, as I've been asked, well, when should I start automating, or what should I automate? And we actually developed a formula that we can use to define when we should automate. We call it 15-1-1-5. Okay, so you can kind of like somewhat easy to remember, 15-1-1-5. And what I tell people, get out a sticky note and write that at the top of it, 15-1-1-5. More than 15 minutes a day, more than an hour per week, more than an hour per month. And I'm going to leave the last 5 part to we're going to leave some suspense around what that last 5 means. But 15-1-1-5, if it's happening more than 15 minutes a day, more than an hour a week, or more than an hour a month, it's time to start looking into automation.
Yeah.
Or it's time to start looking into delegation.
Yeah.
I run a podcast called Automate, Delegate, Eliminate. There's a pivot point in your business when it becomes a repeatable task that's happening over and over again. Automate, delegate, or eliminate. You have to start looking at what that is when it becomes repeatable, because you may get to that point and look at it and be like, wait a minute, this process is actually sucking the life out of my business. One of my clients, her brand is called Puppy Cakes. She actually makes cakes for puppies. I love it when people are like, so what do you do? I make cakes for puppies, like that Puppy Cakes Data Automation. Like, what do you guys do? She was doing this line of potato chips, and she figured out pretty quickly that these potato chips for dogs were, although a decent seller, took so long to make that they were actually a detriment to her overall capacity.
Yeah.
She went in and decided to eliminate that product line. So for her, it was a lot more than an hour per day or 15 minutes per day, but she discovered eliminate was the right option for her business. So don't discount automate, delegate, or eliminate, right?
Yeah.
But that's why that 15 minutes per day, an hour per week, or an hour per month. That sticky note, draw that line across the top and start writing down these processes that are taking that time. And now for the 5 part, 15-1-1-5, do it 5 times manually before you automate. And the reason I say that is, if you try to automate, so I find a lot of people who get excited about automation and they're like, oh, I found this new tool and we really want to use it. So we want you to automate this part of the data so it goes into this new tool. And I say, well, wait a minute, have you ever used this new tool? Like, have you tried to use it manually by doing some, like, you want to automate this data source or force it to work for you? Have you tried to force it to work for you manually yet? And they're like, no, well, we thought we would just I mean, you guys are data automation. That's what you do, right? We're like, whoa, stop, stop, stop. We should figure out what data imports actually need to go in there
Yeah.
to make this work for you manually. We do a process called systems design, where we go in and like actually figure out what the manual inputs look like, and then we can automate. So do it 5 times manually so you know whether to turn left or right or go straight or stop. Otherwise, you begin to automate things and then you'll get in and the process will happen the second time. You're like, oh crap, I have to re-automate that, or I have to add a new if then in there because the whole thing's broken. So 15-1-1-5. That's
Yeah.
the magic formula, so to speak, into when you should automate.
You're singing to the converted here. I mean, I'm a massive fan of automation and that word delegation. And I think, but unfortunately, I probably still hang on to too many things. So I do need to eliminate or delegate or automate more. I think I think a lot of our listeners will relate to that. But I love that 15-1-1-5. Yeah, that's a really, really good way to think through that thing that you're spending that time doing. Obviously get used to doing it manually so many times, or 5 times in your instance, first, and then right, how are we going to automate it or not? Or get rid. Yeah. So let's just jump back over. I touched on sort of the marketing sort of automation out there. What would you say to someone who says sort of marketing needs to be human? I don't want to automate. You know, I don't think we can automate this. There's humans at the end of our marketing, and they need to be, you know, worked with individually and marketed to individually. Or, you know, what would you say to those people that are really sort of anti-automation?
My favorite thing to tell those individuals is you're not thinking of this process in a granular enough way. There are pieces of your business, of the world, that should not, I just said should not be automated. The number of those tasks that actually need human intuition is a lot less than you think. So the first word of advice that I would give that individual is break it apart. Do you have a diagram describing exactly what that marketing process looks like? Well, first I find the people through a retargeting pixel, and then I follow them around, and then they come back to a landing page, and then they put in their email address, and then I send them an email with more information about what's going on. And then I go through. If you break it down, you will find a piece of that process where you do the same dang thing for every single person. And it's like literally the only dang thing that changes about that email is the name. Well, guess what? There's automation tools out there that can help you put in the name so it can be just as familiar and customized for that one individual as it was for everybody. So that would be my first word of advice: is break it down. Like, what there are pieces of this automation, or excuse me, pieces of this process which can be extracted and handed to a robot, and you can keep all of the human touch element of what you're trying to do. To kind of get it in there and blatantly call it out. An example, our website has an inquiry form where you come and say, you know, contact us. We figured out that there were 5 questions in our onboarding discussion that happened in every single situation. We asked the same 5 questions, and those 5 questions allowed us to get a lot more detail and kind of skip some of the nitty gritty. So when you fill out a contact form on Data Automation's website, we immediately reply with an email that says, hey, we believe in automation. Guess what? This is an automated email. If you'll take 5 minutes and fill out this form, we're going to ask you a couple of questions, and then we're going to give you a link to our calendar, which is what you wanted anyway. I'm going to give you what you wanted anyway, and I'm going to ask you some questions while I give you what you wanted anyway. And then when we get on our first call, we can skip the first 30 minutes of hem and haw because I've already asked you those 5 questions. And the thing I just described to you is extremely human touch, right? Like, I need to know these 5 questions, and I need you to feel like you are important. And so me eliminating that half hour of time that you and I both had to spend, my customers actually thank me for it. They're like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
for eliminating a half an hour for both of us.
You're having a better call, aren't you? Both for both sides. You know, you're sort of skipping a lot of basics, if you like, that where you can, right, this type of client potentially they are this is the problem. This is the potential discussion avenue, rather than still trying to, you've got that time. Yeah, very, very
The
smart.
fun part is sometimes the form actually will go to a point where it'll say, you know what, we really appreciate your interest. We're not a good fit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And then we save both of us an hour,
yeah,
right? We didn't jump on the phone and
yeah,
and BS for an hour. Like
yeah,
we skipped it. And
yeah,
and and how kind is it? So Brene Brown, clarity, kindness, they equal each other.
yeah,
Like, how kind is it to be like, you know what, you're just not the right size yet.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
we've dealt with enough clients to
yeah.
know that you're not going to be able to afford what we can do
I
yet.
think that's great. I mean, we use in our business quizzes, so somebody comes in, so are you an e-commerce store? Yes. Okay, that's great, because we're an e-commerce agency. No, well then, we'll refer you to a resource, because we probably can't help you. So saving your time and ours, to be brutally honest. But we probably do know somebody that can, or there's some resources on another one of our businesses sites that could help you. But if you're on our e-com agency site, we've got a very specific type of client that we work with. And if you are that, if you don't fit that mold and that model, then, we probably can point you in the right direction with a resource, with a webinar, with a partner, whoever that may be. So yeah, no, that's great. I think, so going back to the very specific e-commerce, obviously, a lot of our listeners are, working on sort of Magento, Shopify, Woo, and all various others. But, they're the sort of the main ones, I think, where we've got a lot of listeners on. What would you say the main things that those stores should be thinking about automating? What are some of the things that they should be doing? It's a bit of a no-brainer. What should they be thinking about, and what should they be going away and doing?
So the thing that I would say to them is ask yourself, what are the highest touch points? Remember, go back to 15115. I'm going to give you some examples of over the years, things that e-commerce sellers have come to me and said, oh my gosh, this is way more than 15115. Like, I've now done this 100 times and it is taking 5 hours per week. So the places I would start looking are, look for places where you do massive amounts of calculation using spreadsheets to get at data.
Yeah,
So if you're spending 2 or 3 hours a week doing an inventory analysis and you've got pivot tables or Excel formulas, or even just data that you're uploading into another system and it's taking a long time to mash that data together, those are not immediately, wow, that was easy to automate, but they should be looked at by an automation professional. So
yeah,
that would be the first place that I would look for, is look for places where you're taking three or four different data sources,
yeah,
mashing them together in a pivot table to get analysis, and
yeah,
ask yourself, if I had access to a real-time dashboard that had this data available, how much better could I be
yeah,
at my business for what's there? And then reach out to someone like Richard or me
yeah,
and ask them, hey, have you ever seen somebody
yeah,
who has automated this? And the answer is usually yes.
yeah.
Like we know a dashboard, we've built software like that before, we know someone who's connected that. You're not the only person who's done that. That's very common in an e-commerce business.
So
So
you quite
that's the
often
first
see
place I
that
would
then
go.
with different systems. One system that maybe doesn't, well, traditionally doesn't connect. Well, it does, I think, is what we're saying, obviously, but you might not think it can. You might think that you're unique. Oh, we use this warehouse system and this account system and this product image system and this inventory system and this Shopify Magento. That doesn't work with that, and that, or they might not think it will. And then this is where you're saying sort of automation can then come in and work with 2 or 3 different platforms. Yeah.
And that's even so I'm more specifically talking about analyzing data in the first use case that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When you mentioned, well, I'm taking this data from over here and I'm pushing over here, let's talk about inventory. So there are 3 main objects inside an e-commerce business that I tell people, if you are manually transferring any of these 3 objects from point A to point B from 2 different software systems, stop and get it automated. Orders, tracking, and inventory. And they're like, wait, well, that makes up my entire e-commerce business. Yep, you're right, it does. So if you're transferring that to another 3PL system, if you're using an e-commerce system to kind of aggregate your multi-channel stuff where you're bringing stuff in, there are entire inventory management systems built to go up and sync that inventory in different places. Oh, and then you have a 3PL that is using some archaic piece of software, and so they can't sync what's going on. As you grow, 3PL is a common natural step that comes into the growth. Most large e-commerce sellers that I work with, they have brought a 3PL in at some point, third-party logistics company, to begin fulfilling their orders because they just straight up don't have enough time to do it in their garage.
Yeah.
Right. And there's all sorts of other pieces. There's drop shippers that you can bring in where you have somebody else who's making it, and not only they're making it, but they're sending it to FBA. We just got finished building a piece of software where literally all it does is they prepare the shipment to go off to Amazon, and they scan the FBA label, and it pops up on an iPad and says, this is exactly how this should be packed. This is exactly how many are left in the shipment. And we built this piece of software for another e-commerce seller. So look at your processes, look at what's going on in there, use 15115. So the transfer of any of those three objects, orders, inventory, or tracking information, back and forth between different, out of ship station, into ship station, up to Skubana, down from Skubana, out to some third party system that you're using a store that's very new but has a lot of traction, and so nobody's importing those orders automatically. Like, it can be done, even if there's no API. It can be done. In terms of getting what's going on. So those would be like the four main places: analyzation of data, orders, tracking, inventory.
Yeah. So maybe obviously four core areas, but you've obviously worked with a lot of e-commerce stores, a lot of Shopify, Magento, and others. What would be, if we were to go a layer in further, what would be some real sort of things that you don't give out too often, or real actionable tips that our listeners could go away and maybe action, or quite low cost could action?
Yep. So here's a low cost action. If you do not currently have a form around returns or customer inquiries, stop. Get rid of that open-ended, if you have a question, send us an email at support@yourbrand.com. Like get rid of that support email. Like just take it off the website and create a form where you ask people the questions that every single one of them. What's their inquiry going to be about? Oh, it's going to be about, is this in stock? I have a problem with my order. I want to start a return. What are the 7 different categories of common things that are in there? Eliminate the support at email and create a form. That would be the first place. And the reason that eliminate, the time savings alone for your support team, or for you when you're having to answer those support inquiries, it's mind-blowing. Use a software like Gravity Forms or Typeform or one of these others to put people through the quiz that we were talking about earlier with Richard, where we ask the right questions. That would be the first place I would go. The second place I would go is I would start to figure out the automation steps that come after those customer support inquiries. So let's say that they're asking about, is this item still in stock? If you ask them to actually put in the link, or you create a dropdown where they can choose the item they want to know is in stock, you can automatically reply to that email by checking the inventory number, as long as the inventory number is right, inside Shopify or Magento or WooCommerce, and come back to them and say, guess what? It is in stock. Or let's create a listener that automatically notifies people when that is in stock, right? So you start to create canned responses and sometimes automated responses for what's there. Another common one that I've seen is order comes in, something went wrong, and now it's actually out of stock. Now there's a whole conversation you have to have between you and the client about, hey, oops, the thing you ordered is actually out of stock. That entire conversation, the first 5 emails, can be automated. Order comes in, identify it's out of stock, send an email out. Oops, sorry, this is actually out of stock. We are going to watch this daily and notify you if it does come in stock in the next 5 days. You can send 5 automated emails. This is still out of stock. 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 And then a 5th email that says, you know what, we're really sorry. This is still out of stock. We're not sure when it's coming back in. Why don't you click this link to schedule a 15-minute call with us, and we'll talk about what we can do for you. You jump on the call, sell them a different product, or let them know when it's actually coming in, and they're like, okay, yeah, I'm okay to wait. So that entire process of the TikTok customer, because it's not happening, automatable.
Yeah, I love it. It's a bit like when you look at a product page and there's a Q&A section on the product page, but we're Q&Aing the potential questions on email, but rather than like manually replying, we've got an automation in place. I love it. And obviously, if you've got a busy store, that potentially is thousands of emails every week, every month, that are
Mhm.
automated, and ultimately more sales coming through because those blockages, gaps, things that are stopping those orders coming through because they want to ask a simple question or check on stock availability or something that's usually just quite simple, and you're just sitting writing the same thing out again and again and again. Yeah, I love that. Quite a simple.
Look at your canned responses. So you mentioned like that brings up another idea here. The canned responses that you're sending to your like maybe you're like, well, I've already got canned responses. Look at those canned responses and start to look at the keywords that are going there. And there are many different pieces of software that automate support tickets to the point where someone types the subject line, and you've seen this on other sites. They type the subject line that they want to send to you, and it immediately pops up 6 different
Yeah,
support articles
yeah, yeah,
that answer the person's question. You can eliminate the inquiry before it even comes in. So,
yeah,
and there's software, it's very
yeah.
affordable in terms
Like,
of making a knowledge base
yeah.
that's searchable like that.
Just like when you go to Google and it auto starts to type in what is, and then it, how to bake a cake, before you've even typed in bake a cake or whatever it may be. Yeah. Fantastic. So that's great. I think a lot of actionable takeaways there for our listeners. Now, let's just maybe go a little bit deeper and think about if we could maybe give me an example of a project that you've worked on where you've implemented automation, some of the things that you've done that have really improved results, and a real sort of real world example of something that you've implemented.
So, and we've done hundreds of different automations. And so that's like asking, a car mechanic, what's the best, what's the most effective thing you've done to a car to make it work better? And he's going to be like, oh, there's a lot of cars I've worked on over the years. One thing I tell people is honestly an actionable tip that I think every e-commerce seller should have on their computer right now. Ask yourself if you have what's called a clipboard manager. This is one of my favorite tips to give to e-commerce sellers because e-commerce sellers often have to copy multiple things like email addresses from orders that are late, or order numbers that are late, or order numbers that have an issue because XYZ Shopify something or plugin didn't work and you need to give 3 order number examples. Clipboard managers make it so you don't have to flip back and forth between 2 different screens. You copy, 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 paste, paste, paste. So it's a history manager. The one that I like, I'm on a Windows machine, is called Clip. That's it's free. It's one that I really like. And then there's another one on Mac. I think it's called Clip Help or Clip History. And if you Google Clipboard Manager for Mac, Clipboard Manager for PC, you're going to find hundreds of them. Mine is even searchable. So let's say that 3 days ago, I copied something and I was like, oh, the response I gave to so-and-so
Yeah.
would be perfect for this person. You can keyword search as long as you've copied it and put it in your clipboard. You can keyword search for that exact response and give it back to them. So
Yeah.
clipboard managers, and you asked for a specific automation project, and I gave you like an automation tool that I think every e-commerce seller on the planet should have installed.
Yeah.
Clipboard managers are the bomb.com.
Yeah.
Um,
Love it.
if we're talking about a specific, well, let's talk about an automation project that we want to kind of get into the weeds, nitty gritty. Let's talk about one of my clients who basically he needed to take data sources from 3 different places to understand where his inventory was at any given time to do some forecasting essentially. So he had his inventory management solution, he had his Shopify or big commerce stores, and he had these different places where the inventory was. We needed to bring that inventory all into one spreadsheet so that he could then go back and order from his suppliers. So he had this spreadsheet where he was kind of figuring out where it was. And actually, I lie, he wasn't even using a spreadsheet. They were going product by product and they were looking up the inventory on Amazon and they were like, okay, I think I need another 50 of these. Now, who's got those? And he was going to the individual supplier stores to figure out who had them, to figure out how to order, and line by line. So it was taking 15 to 30 minutes per product to figure out what he needed to order. And I mean, it was mind blowing how much time he was spending, like 15 minutes per product.
Wow.
And we were like, okay, well, let's just figure out all the data sources, put them into one place, and put them all next to each other. So he could take 3 minutes, 2 minutes per product to be like, okay, 10 of those, 15 of those, 16 of those, 16 of those, send off a PO. 10 of those, 16 of those, send off a PO. And so that was a big part of for him, was forecasting and putting all of that data into the right place, the same place,
Yeah.
to go in and take on that process.
Love it. Love it. Love it. I think, yeah, some great stuff there. So I always like to ask a question around what you think's coming down the pipeline, in terms of the next probably 1 to 3 years. What would you say the future of automation is going to be? Is there any sort of standout things that we'll look back in a couple of years and say, we'll mention that we should have implemented that? What's the sort of things or the thing that we need to be looking out for as an e-commerce store?
I would say that the number one thing you should be keeping your eyes on is probably no code and the movement that's happening there. E-commerce and no code are a place that they haven't really joined worlds yet. So I don't know if you knew it, but there's people out there who have made plug and play. So most of you are aware of, like, WordPress now has themes like Divi and Theme Builder and these places where you can like drag and drop the front end UX UI. They've automated the design part of a website to the point where most anybody can just kind of plug and play a lot of that sort of stuff. That's been taken to another level where there are websites out there. Bubble.io is an example where Bubble will allow you to create an entire marketplace. Like, you can recreate eBay for a couple $1,000s. Like, think about it. If you were to go and be like, I want to make an eBay. If you wanted to go out and make an eBay 10 years ago, you would have spent, 150 to 350 grand to get the guts built for something like that. Because eBay is so sophisticated. It's got a ticket system. It's got the idea of vendors and sellers and all of this crazy stuff. There's people out there now who have basically built a Lego set, and they hand you the Lego set and say, now you can build eBay. And the Lego set costs $1,500. And then you spend, 20 to 80 hours assembling the Lego set. And when you're done, it's like, wow, I have eBay. Like, I can be eBay or TripAdvisor, or like, think of all of the major, like, big people. Like, you can make a niche version of those for $1,500 to $2,000. That is coming to e-commerce. In the next 3 years, I foresee, like, make your own version. And they already have some of them out there. They're like open source, but open source means there's still coding involved. So like Uberloo is one that, if you haven't heard of Uberloo, they're kind of making, like, for a couple $1,000s, you can customize your own version of a Shopify store and do something totally crazy. It's not no code yet, but it will be. So in the next 3 years, I foresee no code hitting e-commerce in a way that makes the checkout experience amazing. Like there's several companies who basically have their own, and they're similar to Uberloo, where they have a checkout cart process that can be customized to the point where you have your own Amazon. Like, imagine if you wanted to run your own marketplace full of everyone's like, man, I should build Amazon. It's not as easy. It's not as hard as it sounds. Because people have built out of the box tools that have all of those bells and whistles into it for a couple $1,000s. So that, I believe, is one of the things that I would keep your eyes open for. What's going to replace, or is Shopify going to roll out more of a plug and play interface where you can be like, I just wish Shopify did this. And they're like, well, it's right here. There's a plugin for that. Yeah. Or there's a drag and drop interface that changes the workflow and the logic. That's what I think is coming in the next 2 years.
I think we'll put in the diary a date for 2 years' time, and we'll see what's what.
Yep. And it's hitting a lot of the other spaces for technology. Like, it's hitting them right now. Like, like I said, you can already create eBay. You can already create Amazon.
Yeah.
I believe that the Shopifys of the world and some of those pieces, you can create them, but the level of complexity and what's available is not quite there yet, and it's coming. Okay. It's going to become more mainstream, I think.
So on that sort of semi-topic, tools, is there any tools that you think that the guys listening in, the Shopify, the Magento, the platforms that are going to help our guys to sort of expedite their automation journey? What tools would you recommend?
So I go back to the first one I mentioned already, a tool, Clipboard Manager. If you do not have a Clipboard Manager and your team is not using Clipboard Managers, you're missing out on 15 minutes of automation every single day. Add that up, gets real awesome real fast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Clipboard Managers is the #1 personal tool that I would install.
Yeah.
The second place that I would go and look out at different places, and most people are using this already, but I'm going to mention it, password managers. LastPass, OnePass, these tools that allow you to save those passwords and securely distribute them around your team.
Yeah.
That's another place I would go. Another tool I would put out there is Loom or Screencastify.
Yeah.
If you are not currently using, so when you're like, hey, Shopify plugin guy, my Shopify plugin is broken, or my Magento plugin is broken. Please do not be the guy that says it's broken. Just send it's broken. Because developer 1 is going to pull his hair out when he gets that message.
Yeah.
And 2, he's not going to be able to help you. It just ticks him off.
Yeah.
So instead of saying it's broken, be like, it's broken, and I recorded a video showing you how. And you record your screen and show what's there. So Loom, Screencastify, those are 2 tools I put in. Now let's talk e-commerce specific tools. Get a ticket system.
Yeah.
Like, go implement Zendesk or Help Scout or one of those other systems that are out there. Another tool I would recommend, and don't get me started, we could spend like 6 hours just talking tools. Hotjar.
Yeah.
Hotjar is unreal. It literally, if you were ever like, man, I just wish I could sit behind my customers and watch what they do on the website. See exactly what they do and where they get stuck. Install Hotjar, then go pee your pants because you literally have a front row seat. Because you're watching exactly where they get stuck.
What are they doing? What are they doing? Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Cool. You can record 100 visitors for free. Yeah. Like, it's not like this is expensive. Like 100 visitors for free. It will tell you so much more about why people aren't buying. Like Google Analytics is powerful. Don't discount that. But watching like the movement on the mouse, you can almost read their minds. Like, oh, they're stuck on that. Oh, they don't understand what that word means. They're spending way too much time hovering over that. Okay, I got to change the wording there. So Hotjar would be another one that I would say, like, go get that in there.
Plenty to go out there. I mean, Loom is one we use in all of my front-facing team. Have all got, we've got an agency. I think they call it a corporate account, business account, and we've got probably 10 licenses for Loom. We love it in our agency. It's just fantastic. A little video, 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute video to a client or potential customer in an e-commerce store's instance, or to a dev, like you say, there's something not working with something, or fantastic. So I like to finish every episode, Will, with a book recommendation. What book would you recommend to our listeners?
Oh man, I knew this was coming, and the number of books. Honestly, the one that I would probably go with, I can't do one. I'm gonna do 2. The Lean Startup.
Okay.
And the Lean Startup, I'll be honest, is more about software. They talk more about software. Behind me,
actually, on that shelf somewhere.
You got that up there on the shelf? The Lean Startup is applicable to both online and offline e-commerce stores. And the reason it is because it challenges you. I lied, I'm going to give you 3. The Lean Startup, okay? It challenges you to think about the assumptions you're making about the business and fail faster. So fail faster is huge. The second one I would say, if you're kind of just getting new to this idea of business and how do you create a system, Michael Gerber's The E-Myth, that talks about like what does it mean?
That's right there as well.
You'd think I was actually in your office there picking out the E-Myth. Yep. There you go. Okay, so the E-Myth, the Lean Startup, and what is it? So the third one that I'm gonna throw out there for you is Leadership and Self-Deception.
Okay.
Leadership and Self-Deception is not a super well-known book.
Yeah.
When you get to the point of delegate in your business, you have to learn how to treat people like people instead of treating people like objects. And it's very natural to treat people like objects, like cogs in the system, cogs in the wheel. But if you treat them like objects, they're going to leave. And that's your most important asset when it comes to delegation. And you're never going to scale. It's never going to be a party of 1. You're going to have a party of 2, party of 3, party of 4. And then you insert automation and delegation. Remember, automate, delegate, eliminate. If you don't know how to treat people the right way, you're going to burn it out. And I personally have, and if any of my prior employees are listening, I've learned a lot. And leadership and self-deception is one of the ways that I've learned a
I
lot
think
about how to treat people right.
we've just got our soundbite for this episode, because that is a brilliant, brilliant finish. Absolutely, 100% agree. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the eCommerce One podcast. I look forward to catching up with you again in 2 years' time.